We acknowledge and respect the first humans of the unceded land we call San Francisco, the Ramaytush Ohlone. We condemn the genocide of these and other tribes across the Western Hemisphere. We honor their legacy and history, and we support rematriation and sovereignty efforts. Welcome to Storied San Francisco, a podcast all about the people and places that make this city unique. I'm your host, Jeff Hunt. This is part 2 of our episode on Friends of the Urban Forest. If you missed part 1, please go back and listen to that. In this podcast, we sit back down with Brian and Zeima, 2 staff members at FUF, to talk about a wide range of topics, from green gentrification and how FUF aims to mitigate that, to this last winter's record-breaking precipitation and massive number of lost trees. The first voice you'll hear is Zeima's. Here's part 2 with Friends of the Urban Forest.
I think it surprises people a lot when they hear that green gentrification is actually a thing. There are the inherent benefits that come with greening a space, but then there are also some negative aspects that come with it as well. Folks often feel, because we're working in the public right of way, unless they're directly involved with the process, they often feel like something is being taken from them, which is super understandable, which is why we work so hard to get people to be a part of the process. Select their tree, help us designate where the basin will go, etc. And so we consider ourselves a community-based nonprofit that plants trees for that reason. But on the other side of that, when you're planting trees, you're inherently increasing property values, you could be pricing people out. And then back to the original problem, which is that what they wanted? Right. So always considering the impact that we're having when we're planting trees and that it might not always be positive.
Right. Thank you, because that makes a lot of sense.
That's absolutely that synthesis and summary was spot on. I would add just briefly to it that our streets and sidewalks are public space, and it's one of the last things, and I've been working on streets now for almost a decade in one shape or form. It's one of the last spaces that I think everyone feels like they have some right to say what happens in. You know, they're contested spaces in ways, parks are maybe similar too, but in ways that other parts of our urban geography aren't. And when you talk about change, I think it's natural to ask the question, why is this being changed and for who?
Right.
And if I didn't ask for this, is it being done to benefit me?
Right.
And then you get into all sorts of different uses of, there are, are multi-generational multifamily households that maybe have a 1-car garage but need 4 cars for their separate jobs and are using the sidewalk as extra parking space. And planting a tree there would negatively impact their ability to do that. That could go on. There are, but that's a big one. That's a huge one.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a good way to segue into the program. Yeah. Like how it actually works, how plantings from the ground up.
From the ground up, absolutely. Let's start from the beginning, boots on the ground.
Let's get into the roots of the...
Absolutely. Yeah, so our tree planting program, our community tree planting program, we call it that specifically, has, as Brian mentioned, has functioned very uniformly for the last 30 years. It's kind of incredible to look back at files and see that people were doing things exactly the same way with some slight changes, like technology, for example. Right. But anyways, so to get us started, we generally start with our community engagement team who does on the ground engagement with neighbors, with citizens, with business owners, with local nonprofits, local community organizations, anyone that works in a specified neighborhood that we've designated. I will go back a little bit. The areas that we work in are currently delineated by our grants, and so we're specifically targeting disadvantaged areas, specifically economically.
Specific parts of the city.
Correct.
Got it, okay.
And so from there, we'll pick a neighborhood, we'll pick some sites in the neighborhood that look like they could, A, use trees, or B, really accommodate trees. Not every neighborhood has the right sidewalk to have a tree
Right.
planted on it.
Right.
Which is why we have to be really strategic, because if the goal is to plant every available planting space, we have to check every available planting space first. So that's where my team comes in. We go boots on the ground. We walk from block to block and see if there's any available place where we can plant.
Amazing.
Collect addresses, and then from that point, our community engagement team will send a letter and a postcard informing folks that live in that home, or the tenants or the residents, landowner, etc., that we will be planting a tree at no cost to them, and that we would love them to be a part of the process. After couple of weeks to give them time to read over the letters, get the postcard. Then my team will come in and do initial site assessments, final site assessments, species consultations with people that have any, like, are you interested in flowers? Do you want a tree with purple leaves, etc. So from there, we then purchase the trees, get all the materials that we need on site. We find a location in the neighborhood where we can host our volunteers. And then we have a big celebration. Have you been to one yet?
It's been so long, like probably in the aughts.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, it's almost the same.
I am talking with Ben about doing one, I think, with y'all on the 6th.
May 6th.
I think
yeah,
so.
That would
Lower Nob Hill.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
That's a great idea.
I want to come out and take photos and maybe record.
I was going to say, yeah, it's a great opportunity. It's very lively, very energetic. The whole team comes out. We have anywhere from 30 to 50 volunteers.
Wow.
And we plant anywhere from 20 to 45 trees.
Wow.
We have a potluck. Sometimes we work with corporate groups. So we've worked with like Salesforce quite often. And, it's just a really lighthearted, fun day. And our volunteers will plant the trees and come back for a potluck. And then we do it over and over again.
Nice. A lot of oxygen to you.
Yeah.
Guaranteed to feel better after spending the morning planting a tree.
Think so. Yeah.
It's a good way to start the weekend.
Okay. And then, so, like, do you have stats at hand? Like, per planting, you said that many, but, like, how many plantings do y'all do a year? Are you back to sort of your max capacity since the pandemic, I'll say?
Oh, that's a great question. We've actually shifted our maximum capacity in the hopes to put more energy towards community engagement and getting involved in the neighborhood. We're scaling back the number of trees that we plant in a singular planting. But for the stats, we have about 18 plantings a year.
Okay.
And anywhere from 20 to 45 trees per planting. This last fiscal year, we planted about 1,120 trees.
Wow. Sorry, that's the sound of my jaw hitting
No.
the floor. That's just a lot.
It's great. And we've also been able to maintain over 2,000 of the trees that we've previously planted.
Right.
So we do tree care. We water 500 trees a week. The stats are real.
Thank you. I was going to ask about maintenance. So that is a huge part of what y'all do.
Yeah, so we maintain the tree for up to 3 years, sometimes even 5 years, depending on the species. We water the tree. If not us, then the city waters the tree every week for the first 3 years of establishment. And then at that point, the tree can tap into groundwater and survive on its own.
And what are those bladder bags that I sometimes see?
Yeah, we call those gator bags. They're our water bags.
Yes.
They can accommodate up to 20 gallons of water. So it's a nice way to have the water percolate into the soil rather than all rush out and cause any sort of erosion.
It's almost like hipster coffee, right? It's like super slow, just like
They have
this
a
tree's
tiny,
getting
those
water.
bags have a tiny one pinhole at the two at the bottom. That's it. And they drip.
Very slowly.
I love it. But no, that is a really impressive number, especially because you just said y'all kind of, and I'm maybe putting words in your mouth, but like the focus seems like it shifted to quality over quantity,
Correct.
like how we do it
Correct.
versus how many we do it.
Exactly.
But that's impressive.
The other impressive stat that I would be neglecting my job if I didn't mention is that in those 40 plus years, we've planted well over 60,000. I think we're getting close to 65,000 trees. That's over half of the street trees in San Francisco. Yeah.
Is there a broad goal? We've talked about canopy and how San Francisco, at least compared to other cities its size, is lacking the kind of cover that we'd like to see here. Is that part of what the big goal is? Yeah.
The city has an urban forestry plan, and Zeima mentioned its goal, which is to plant every available planting space on the street
That's the city's goal.
That's the city's goal, and we are a key partner in achieving that.
Okay.
And I think what you're going to see in the coming years, hopefully, is a both-and strategy to our work, which is both quality and quantity.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have identified, and not only the city and county of San Francisco, the sort of consensus in the community, the scientific community, folks who make policy around climate, is that trees are essential green infrastructure. San Francisco is going to spend billions of dollars, for instance, shoring up our seawall along the Embarcadero to deal with rising sea levels. We need to be making a similar investment in the trees on our streets because they have similar climate resiliency benefits when it comes to lowering the temperature during extreme heat events. Shaded neighborhoods are sometimes up to 10 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than neighborhoods without trees. And when you're waiting for a bus or you're walking to the grocery store, those 10 degrees of difference can have a huge impact on your health. Not to mention the fact that most of the housing stock in San Francisco doesn't have air conditioning.
Right.
We're not a city with central air.
Right.
And we're blessed with fog and this, a city of microclimates, and our eastern neighborhoods, in particular, closer to the bay, experience hotter temperatures, and we are seeing more extreme heat events.
Yeah.
Brian, I want to get this stat correctly.
Yes.
Based on a report just released by our Urban Forestry Council, the San Francisco Urban Forestry Council, we have planted 100 trees more this last year than we lost. So despite our organization planting over 1,000 trees, as a city as a whole, we've only gained 100 trees.
So, like, take Friends of the Urban Forest out of the equation, and we're, like, doomed. But to go back to no trees.
Concerning, yes.
Yes.
I mean, no, doomed is right.
Eyebrow raising, to
Yes.
say the least.
And sorry, I meant to say that was before the storms.
Right, before that. Well, maybe that's our segue.
Yeah.
So, like, fresh on my mind, I actually was able to travel a little bit this winter, but, like, every time I did, and I was here for some of the worst ones, I'm like, what the heck is happening? And it was happening pretty much all up and down the West Coast. But, like, let's talk about the impact of this 2023 winter storms in San Francisco.
We are seeing climate extremes here in California, and certainly in the Bay Area and in San Francisco. We went from 3 years in a row of extreme drought that dried up the soil, that weakened and stressed the root systems of our trees, to 3 or 4 months of incredible intense rain and wind events that were really unprecedented, or at least we hadn't had that much rain and that much wind. And so you had then soil that was saturated and became loose. And all it took is a gust of wind. Even mature, healthy trees that had strong, normally would be strong and be able to withstand that, were weakened to the point that they were much more susceptible to failure or to falling.
Can we stats nerd out on
So
this?
I've gotten in trouble from Public Works about this. They're still our Department of Public Works, which has underneath it the Bureau of Urban Forestry, which is the city agency that's responsible for maintaining all of our street trees. Is still finalizing their count. Supervisor Melgar is going to be having a hearing in May where they're expected to report out the total number of trees lost.
Okay.
I've been cautioned by the head of Public Works not to that some trees look like they may be dead, but they have just lost large limbs, and they may be able to survive with some additional pruning and care.
Okay.
But it's hundreds, probably thousands of trees that we've lost this
And
winter.
that would count, I mean, if we're making a war comparison, like we have our dead and we have our injured casualties, but they maybe some have survived.
We're hopeful, You know more about that than I do.
Yeah, trees are really resilient, and if they're still standing and if they manage to leaf out in the next spring, then there's no point in removing the tree. It's still sequestering carbon. It's still doing everything that we need a street tree to do. So ideally those don't become casualties.
Go tree, go.
Go trees.
Yeah. Do we already have, because I've heard or maybe seen or whatever, read reports of like a record number of downed trees, but also I would say, just as dangerous and just as sort of symbolic of how powerful and how many storms there were, down large limbs and So it is already kind of like
all signs point to this being a record-breaking year for tree loss, and it's had real impacts. Unfortunately, property and loss of life included.
Yeah, and then so where does Friends of the Urban Forest come in vis-a-vis that?
Yeah.
Well,
Funny you should ask.
Actually a lot going on federally with trees. There's a lot of money being invested into community and urban forestry. So ideally, a pot of that money goes directly to the urban forest of San Francisco.
Okay.
We need to plant not only more trees than we planted last year, we need to plant more trees than the last 3 years combined. We need to move quickly because, as Brian was saying, these effects are being exacerbated with time. Longer droughts, more porous space in the soil, greater risk for mudslides. We've been seeing that enough as it is. We're having long, dry summers, wildfires. I mean, all of these could be remediated by the planting of trees.
Right.
It's undeniable, and so we need to move quickly.
You said the federal government. I'm assuming only recently.
Thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act. That was passed and signed into law by President Biden last year. The federal government will be investing $1.5 billion nationwide in urban and community forestry grants over the next 5 years. And so we are hopeful that the city and county of San Francisco will get a sizable chunk of that to the city. That would help us eventually plant and do some of that catch-up work by growing the map of where we're planting right now.
Ooh, you just said map. Do y'all have a map?
friendsoftheurbanforest.org.
It's on our website.
Does it have all of the trees?
No, so it's a map of where we plant.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there is a map. The city has a version of this, and then there's another website that has called waterthetrees.org that does some of this work too. There's a couple of different folks in this space, the GIS space, that are mapping street trees, and you can click on it and you can see the species that Bureau of Urban Forestry and Public Works has. Probably what I would say is the most reliable version of that database.
Okay.
And you can go on and go down to zoom into your block, and it will click on a icon and it'll tell you what species it is, what the address is.
I'm gonna have fun with that.
Yeah.
Maybe some of the listeners will as well.
There are over 120,000 street trees across San Francisco.
Yeah.
And each one has a story.
I think so.
Yeah, I do too.
I mean, trees are social beings.
Oh, yeah.
Are we going to talk about that? I
Trees
just wanted
are
to drop
social
that.
beings.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
I believe that. I see things about that.
Well, you're talking about the mycorrhizal relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the data is clear, and it suggests that trees are communicating with each other far more than we've ever thought before.
Right.
Whether it be through sharing carbohydrates through their root systems or sending out chemical alerts that there are pests in the area. They warn each other if there are like wildfires in the distance. They help remediate loss in like nitrogen or any like fixed nutrient that might be limited in that area. They,
Amazing.
Mycorrhizal relationships. They make a relationship with fungi, and the fungi make it so that all of these nutrients are able to be uptaken by the tree, turned into carbohydrates. You got photosynthesis.
Amazing. And also, I would add, and I think this extends to other flora out there, but like when you see time lapse
Oh my goodness.
of plants, you're like, oh, they're totally alive.
They're
and
so
like dancing.
So
Like,
I did my master's research on ecophysiology. So I measured water like moving through the tree, which is called sat flow,
Okay.
for every 30 seconds, average to the half hour for 2 years straight. And when I tell you they react to like minuscule changes in temperature, like within the millisecond, like they are much more reactive to our environment than we could ever comprehend or even imagine that we could be.
Wow.
They're
I
incredible.
love this stuff. Yeah. Clearly. Okay. Well, I guess with the time we have left, in addition to wanting people to know about who you are, what you do, what do you want, let's say, the average listener to do? Action items.
Yeah, I can start. And I think some of us, I think it can be easy to take the trees on our streets for granted, that they're just a part of the urban landscape and they've been there and they always will be there. And that's absolutely not true. We have what urban forests we have in San Francisco because people have taken action to make that happen. And so that can take a variety of forms. It certainly can be coming out and volunteering with us for a Saturday morning planting. It can be making a donation to help support our work. It can be talking to elected officials and policymakers about how street tree planting and care is reflected in our city's budget, what sorts of policies we have when it comes to mature tree removal for a variety of projects. All of those things require people to take action. And we know in this city that things don't change on their own. People need to come together and raise their voices and make themselves heard. And what I love about San Francisco is that it has such a long and proud history and a rich tradition of doing just that.
I was going to say yelling at each other, but you put it way more diplomatically. No, but I think that does speak to passion coming from all sorts of different communities and people and for causes and
And you are not alone. People are certainly passionate about trees.
Nice. Was there more to the call to action? Because I feel like y'all were going to...
I was going to say reach out to your elected officials about the city budget. I mean, especially right now as, these big ticket items are being discussed, I can't think of a more important time.
And then because I believe it used to be the case that if you're just like... maybe even a renter, and you're like, oh, it'd be cool if there was a tree outside is that something people can do?
We don't distinguish between tenants or owners when it comes to folks who live. We talk about residents, that just because somebody rents and, over half of all San Franciscans do, I think, or it's close to that number.
Yeah.
We all deserve the benefits of trees outside of where we live and work and play. So we don't distinguish between whether you own the house or you rent it. If you want a tree,
we got you.
Yeah.
That was Brian Wiedenmeyer and Zeima from Friends of the Urban Forest. We're taking a little break from new episodes next week, but do look for a bonus podcast with a special message in it next Tuesday. We'll be back in June with a visit to the historic Bayview Opera House. Episode 18 drops on June 6th. Music for Storied San Francisco was produced, performed, and curated by Otis McDonald. Michelle Kilfeather does original photography for us. Aaron Lim of Bitch Talk Podcast is our contributing producer. And the show is produced and hosted by me, Jeff Hunt. Now in our 5th season, we have more than 200 episodes available on our website, storiedsf.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're able to, please rate and review the show. And drop us a line at storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Stay strong, weird, and healthy. And we'll see you next time on Storied San Francisco.
This podcast is a proud member of the BFF.FM podcast network. Learn more at podcasts.bff.fm.
BFF.FM, best frequencies forever.